The following story contains graphic images that could be disturbing to some. Viewer discretion is advised.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us. 2009 has been an incredible year, especially when you're lucky enough to cover news around the world. We've had the opportunity and privilege of bringing you something unique, and that's the stories and perspectives you're mostly not hearing anywhere else. We strive very hard to look beyond the headlines, to dig really deeply into topics that oftentimes are brushed over in the manic world of cable and other news. We also give stories the time that they deserve. So as we wrap up 2009, we thought it might be interesting to take a look back at our year with snapshots of some of the stories we've covered. We begin in Afghanistan, where there was an election, a change in command, a change in strategy, and a surge in U.S. and NATO troops. But there's so much more to the story. Few broadcast outlets anywhere in the world have devoted the time and resources we have to covering the conflict and the consequences. In May, we aired a story on limiting civilian casualties, whom to shoot and whom not to shoot. We traveled to the dangerous city of Kandahar in southern Afghanistan. The people here are heirs to a rich cultural history, but this regional southern capital is now one of the most violent parts of the country. Western journalists seldom come here. It's a Taliban stronghold, and it will be the center of America's troop increases. Many an empire has fought for its control. In 1994, the Taliban captured the city and made it their headquarters. You can see through the haze the outline of a mosque where Mullah Omar, the Taliban leader, once preached. If this city of over 300,000 looks like it's frozen in history, there's a good reason. Legend says it was founded by Alexander the Great, and it sits astride the famed trade routes of antiquity. Today, the city is on edge. The people here, like those throughout Afghanistan, are uncertain of the future. A fledgling local police and army try to keep the peace, but all await the arrival of the Americans and the battle to come. The expectation is that there will be many civilian casualties, and those who are wounded are likely to end up here at Kandahar's Mirwais Regional Hospital. And what a region it is. This is the only hospital for an area twice the size of Indiana, and it serves more than 2 million people. The hospital was built in the 1970s and can only offer the most basic care. There are several hundred beds, but patients are crowded, many to a room, with no curtains or privacy. The Red Cross helps support the hospital, and one worker estimated that 83% of patients admitted in the wards were affected by the conflict in some way. This man says he was farming the fields in neighboring Helmand province when he was caught in a firefight between the Taliban and coalition forces. His brother brought him to the hospital. Whoever fired the shots, he said, his brother is badly wounded. You expect violence from the Taliban. They're rebels, he argued. But the foreign forces promise stability, and the country has only gotten more dangerous. Now to the east, and another constant threat to soldiers and civilians: suicide bombers who terrorize the fragile framework of Afghanistan's young democracy. In a story from last January, we showed you how a quiet day on the front lines can change in a horrifying instant.
Some of the other areas, you know, a couple kilometers away, they get a lot of action. They get mortared and things like that. I don't know why our area seems so quiet sometimes.
You know there's enemy activity out here, but it's like we're just sitting here docile. We're waiting for them instead of us going out to get them. Yeah, I'd rather be out there.
And then, without warning,
Hey, 2 people follow Doc.
Hold up, you're all not rushing out.
Hey!
Grenade. Grenade. On the ground by the foot. I have no idea.
You're okay, okay? You're okay. You're okay.
Got a live grenade just to the left of the leg. There's another leg over here, but I don't want to walk over there in case something happens. There's a brain and all kinds of bullshit everywhere.
Do we know what happened?
I don't know. I haven't found out yet, but I guess the guy walked up here. They stopped him, talked to him, and he blew up.
surveillance video taken at the gate revealed that a suicide bomber had detonated himself when the Afghan security guard refused to let him on the base. A helicopter arrived to transport the 2 men injured in the attack to an army hospital. One of the men is an Afghan national policeman, and the other, one of the ASG members trained by Zaruba and his team.
I told him, look at me and breathe with me. Breathe with me.
We got really lucky. I think the ASG guy's going to make it. The A&P guy's definitely pretty good, but we just got to stay vigilant. Keep an eye on the ASG. They're going to be a little shaky right now. Everyone tracking? They're going to be a little bit shaky. Sub-governor's a little shooken up right now.
Of course he is.
Yeah.
Oh.
There is speculation that the sub-governor of the Terazai district was the suicide bomber's intended target, perhaps because of his cooperation with coalition forces. Captains Zaruba and Hilt tour the bomb site with the sub-governor and try to assuage his fears by telling him the U.S.-trained Afghan security guard performed extremely well.
And the ASG did a great job. They did exactly what they were supposed to do. And they stopped the suicide bomber from going into the district center.
On my side?
There might be a half of a print on it.
Yeah, there's a print.
All right, nice. Whoop, whoop. I found a finger. Yep.
A finger found among the scattered remains of the suicide bomber is run through the biometric system.
I'm just wiping off the charcoal from the blast to try to get the grooves for the fingerprint so we can identify this guy. There we go. Oh.
A fingerprint is obtained, but it doesn't match anyone in the system, and the search for identifiable body parts and other evidence continues. Back inside, Captain Hilt addresses the men about another concern.
Some of the things that we know is that the kids that typically hang around were walking with the guy just prior to him detonating. We have permission now to take A&P and go search their village. Let me throw this out there. I don't think it was the kids.
Guilty by association.
Yeah, but that's what it is. At this point, we have to take a guilty by association. And who knows, it could have been one of their family members that they didn't even know. That's why we're going over to their village.
At the kids' village, a local man tells Captain Hilt that he hasn't seen anything suspicious, but Hilt knows that there are often other factors at play, such as intimidation from the Taliban.
Tell them that we're very proud of them and we're proud of the A&P that live here, and that we're glad that they're supporting us. If they know something, and they're just scared to tell us and all that stuff, they can come over and we can talk to them separately.
The man also tells Hilt that the kids in his village are good, but that he's happy to keep them away from the base if that's what Hilt wants.
Tell them that they have very good kids. We're all still learning.
And finally, a visit to a remote outpost high in the mountains of the infamous Korengal Valley. It's a story we aired last March that looked at a U.S. policy to dispatch small squads of soldiers to go after the enemy. And the fight is often on the enemy's terms.
When the weather's bad, they don't like to fight. Like with the fog, they can't climb the mountains because they take the high ground. So when the fog's out like this, they won't shoot at us. No, these people are very smart. The way they fight is smart. they're not dumb at all. So people back in the United States, they think nothing's going on in Afghanistan and all that. This is where the fight is.
These are the men of a U.S. Army outpost in Afghanistan's Kunar province. Their firebase is named Restrepo, after a U.S. soldier who lost his life here. Indeed, most of the military landmarks in the Korengal Valley are named after soldiers who were killed in action here. The fighting that takes place in this small area is notorious throughout the war zone. This Army platoon of about 30 men has become so used to the constant sound of gunfire in the valley that they barely react anymore. They're responsible for patrolling about a 5-mile stretch of this land. Their primary enemy is the Taliban, who hide in the treacherous mountains all around them.
Well, this place is the worst place in Afghanistan. It's the worst place in the war zone, honestly. I was in Fallujah, 06, 07. And, I mean, yeah, we got attacked, big attacks, but it was flat ground. You could see the guys easily, and you could handle them. I mean, there was no problem.
Sergeant Carl T. Baker is 22 years old. He's fought in both Iraq and Afghanistan, but he sees the situation here in the Korengal Valley as the most difficult he's experienced.
We take contact pretty much 360 around this area. See, we're the highest fire base in Korengal, and so we're the most likely to take contact.
I mean, these guys are working in 3 to 5 man groups. I mean, they know how to do guerrilla tactics, and these mountains are their homes, so they move through these mountains quick. If you ever watch the movie The Hills Have Eyes, these hills have eyes, and they can see everything you're doing, and you have no clue they're there. You don't see them at all until they open up on you, and even then, it's hard to see them.
Did you see where the RPG originated from? Negative.
They grew up in these mountains. They know these mountains better than we do. They move through them every day. They're the fastest men on earth, and I don't know how they do it, but somehow they get away.
And a footnote, soldiers are now being recalled from outposts like Restrepo. The base will be demolished early next year because of a new policy, a new strategy to station U.S. troops in larger population centers where the new military leadership thinks they can do more to protect the population and help the Afghan government get on its feet by building governance from the bottom up. Now, a unique look at where hundreds of prisoners are being held, many for years on end, without charges or attorneys to represent them. 7 years inside Gitmo was a story we aired in June. In this investigation, we had the opportunity to go inside Guantanamo and to meet a man who says he knows what life was like inside the detention facility. He was released after 7 years there. Tucked into the southeast corner of Cuba is America's oldest naval base, a picturesque and sleepy outpost, taking up 45 square miles of land and sea. Since 1903, Guantanamo Bay Naval Station has served as a fueling base for U.S. operations in Latin America. Today, it's best known for fueling controversy, all because of a part of the base, 3 square miles, that has been circled in razor wire and guard towers. It's a short flight from Fort Lauderdale to what the Bush administration called the War on Terror. Nearly 800 men have passed through Guantanamo's detention center. Today, 239 remain. Who are they? We know they speak at least a dozen languages, and that some are considered, quote, the worst of the worst, masterminds of 9/11. Some others have been ordered released, but they remain at the detention center because they have nowhere to go. Then there are those in a permanent murky purgatory. No evidence to try them in criminal or military trials, but possibly too dangerous to release. In the court of world opinion, how President Obama deals with a couple of hundred men jailed on a small, dusty base in the Caribbean will go a long way to the success or failure of his foreign policy. Tonight, you're going to see the first American television interview with a recently released detainee who was accused in 2001 of plotting to bomb the U.S. Embassy in the European capital of Sarajevo.
Lakhdar Boumediene was born in Algeria and immigrated to Bosnia. He had a wife and 2 children and he worked as an aid worker. But shortly after the attacks of September 11, he was brought in by the local police, accused of conspiring with 5 others to bomb the U.S. Embassy in Sarajevo. When the police told him the charges, Boumediene said he laughed.
I was laughing. I laughed. I told him I have no time to joke with you. I have no time. I have wife and I have daughters and I have my job. I have no time. Please, you can't let me go.
But the Bosnian police officers were not about to let Boumediene go. On January 20th, 2002, Boumediene landed, along with 33 other prisoners, and felt the tropical air of Guantanamo Bay. They were the 5th shipment of prisoners and brought the population of Camp X-Ray up to 110. The next day, he was weighed, measured, and given a prison number, 10005.
I hear the dogs, the soldiers, they yelling, don't talk, don't stay, don't stop, don't sit down, don't stand up, don't. If you move just your head, if you feel tired, and you move your head, the soldier hit you here on your neck by box. He said, don't move. And the translator with him, توقف, he says in Arabic, don't move. If you asked him about water, again, 1 box in your head, your neck, your chest, your back. He don't care to you. Just don't move.
When his hood was finally removed, what he saw around him were a set of images that appeared in newspapers and televisions around the world. The pictures were of Guantanamo's soon-to-be infamous and now abandoned Camp X-Ray. It was here, in the short weeks after 9/11, that a small section of Guantanamo Navy Base was set aside as a detention center. The facilities were makeshift and primitive. The same day that Lakhdar Boumediene sat down with us for an interview in Paris to make his allegations, another one of our producing teams toured the Guantanamo Bay detention facility. The picture they were shown was very different from what Boumediene described.
There's nothing here that I wouldn't be proud to show my mom or my kids or anyone. It's a fact. We operate safely and humanely, 24 hours a day.
Rear Admiral David Thomas has commanded the detention camp for the last year. He was at the Pentagon on 9/11 and ran back into the burning building to save colleagues. He wouldn't talk about that day, but he was eager to talk about Guantanamo. His message? Guantanamo is not what you think. Not now. Not on his watch.
Everything we do here is safe and humane. It's legal. It's in accordance with international law, U.S. law, Department of Defense policy, Army field manuals, the Geneva Convention, Common Article 3. And it's transparent. It couldn't possibly be more transparent.
Admiral Thomas says that over the years, Guantanamo has gotten a makeover. Under his watch, the library now has 14,000 books. There's satellite TV and English classes for the best behaved detainees. While Congress and the President are locked in a fierce debate about what to do with the detainees, Admiral Thomas says his focus is keeping the conditions of detention off the table.
Those are very important, very complicated, complex policy discussions ongoing back home. My president counts on me and everyone else down here to ensure that the detainees are treated with dignity, with safe and humane techniques and processes. So those important, complex policy discussions can go on unencumbered by any question as to how we treat the detainees down here.
But there are lingering questions around the world about how the detainees are being treated even now. We can't be certain about answers to all of these lingering questions and suspicions. There's only so much we can report firsthand as a result of our two-day tour.
Now, when we come back, more from 2009. Defending yourself and your home. It's called the Castle Doctrine. So stay here with us.
Missed an edition of Dan Rather Reports? Or just want to see one again? We're now available on iTunes, so check us out.
We have for you next a story we broadcast last January about the Castle Doctrine, controversial laws that are being passed in state houses across the country. These laws involve the right to protect yourself and your property with deadly force.
Pasadena, Texas is in the heart of oil country, about a half-hour southeast of Houston. It's mostly a blue-collar town where refineries and chemical plants loom over the horizon. In this upscale subdivision, 2 suspected burglars would lose their lives. Whether the killings were acts of self-defense or murder depends on your point of view.
There was 2 of them, officer. There was only 1 of me. Not physically, there ain't no way I could have handled them, okay? And then he went...
This is police video of Joe Horn, just hours after the 62-year-old retired computer consultant shot 2 men from the front yard of his house.
I shot them, okay? I'm not denying that. I did not come out here with no intent to shoot anybody.
Horn said that he opened fire out of fear for his life.
I thought I've been scared in my life, but I ain't ever been scared like this. I ain't ever been scared like this.
But Horn's tone was quite different a few hours earlier when he called 911, a conversation that has become a flashpoint in the controversy.
Pasadena 911, what is your emergency?
Burglars breaking into a house next door. I've got a shotgun. Do you want me to stop them?
Nope, don't do that. Ain't no property worth shooting somebody over, okay?
For the next 6 minutes, the dispatcher tries to calm Horn down.
Stay on the phone with me till we get someone right over there, okay? Don't hang up.
I'm not hanging up, but I'm telling you right now, I don't like this kind of stuff, man. This is ridiculous. Broad daylight.
I've got officers coming out there. I don't want you to go outside that house. And I don't want you to have that gun in your hand when those officers are poking around over there. Okay?
I understand that, okay? But I have a right to protect myself too, sir, and you understand that. And the laws have been changed in this country since September the 1st, and you know it and I know it. I have a right to protect myself.
Texas' new Castle Doctrine law, which had been on the books for just 10 weeks, expanded civilians' rights to use lethal force to protect home and property. Still, the police dispatcher tells Horn to stay inside and wait for police.
God damn it, they just stole something. I'm going out the window. I'm sorry. I ain't going to let them get away with this shit. They stole something. They got a bag of something.
You're going to get yourself shot if you go outside that house with a gun.
You want to make a bet?
Okay, stay in the house.
Minutes pass, and the dispatcher continues to distract Horn.
They got a bag of loot.
Okay. How big is the bag? They're carrying a bag of stuff. They're walking out about a handful.
Yeah.
Which way are they going?
I can't. I'm going outside. I'll find out.
No, I don't want you going outside, Mr. Horn.
Well, here it goes, buddy. You hear the shotgun clicking, and I'm going.
Don't go outside.
Move. You're dead.
Both 38-year-old Hernando Riascos Torres and 30-year-old Diego Ortiz were shot in the back and died of their wounds. The 2 men, police said, were Colombians in the country illegally and were found with cash and jewelry stolen from the neighbor's house. Overnight, in Pasadena and across the country, Horn was hailed as a hero and decried as a cold-blooded killer. Timberline Drive was flooded with protesters and camera crews. Videos of news coverage posted on YouTube have been viewed thousands of times, with hundreds of comments. Joe Horn websites and blogs sprouted up on all sides of the issue.
At this point, where's your shotgun?
I got it here.
Meanwhile, the investigation continued into whether Horn was justified in shooting the burglars.
I had an 911. They hung up, and I called them back. I try to do everything to avoid a situation like this, okay? But I thought I could get a license number or something, okay? That was my intent.
Police and the local prosecutor were not convinced the shooting fell under the new Castle Doctrine law. Even the state senator who wrote the law told the local press, quote, "It comes from the saying, "A man's home is his castle, but this wasn't his castle," unquote. But ultimately, Horn was vindicated by the people. On June 30th, 2008, a Harris County grand jury refused to indict Joe Horn. He walked away a free man.
This next story also comes from Texas, but it's a nationwide problem. A lot of states have this difficulty, and that's the misuse and overuse of prescription drugs. This story aired in October as we investigated laws that have made it particularly easy to get powerful narcotics with few, if any, questions asked.
It's going to be right on here on your left. You'll see the sign for the Pain Relief Center right there.
There it is. South Kirby Pain Relief Center.
He calls these places pill mills.
If you're not here to see the doctor or go to the pharmacy, you need to leave. All right. Now. Okay.
They're often found in strip malls or embedded in nondescript, out-of-the-way buildings. Mom-and-pop pharmacies and clinics working hand in hand, giving out potentially addictive narcotics without asking very many questions.
For people who don't know what a pill mill is, take us through.
The basic definition here in Houston, Harris County, Texas, is usually a storefront operation where people go to get prescription drugs, a prescription for controlled substances. These pain clinics, or pill mills as they're referred to, don't have to be owned or operated right now by a licensed medical doctor. They could be owned by a layperson.
Do I have to be licensed by the city?
No.
Licensed by the county?
No.
Licensed by the state?
No.
Any federal license required?
None whatsoever.
So it's a business like a 7-Eleven or a hot dog stand?
Exactly. It's just like any if you were going to open up a shoe store. There's no licensing requirement as of right now.
Wow. We wanted to see for ourselves how easy it is to get these types of drugs. 3 of our reporters, each going to a clinic only once, were able to buy all of these. All of our reporters used out-of-state IDs, which presented no problems. They just had to fill out a little paperwork, say they were in pain, ranking it on a scale of 1 to 10. Each was given signed prescriptions and directions to a nearby pharmacy with assurances that those prescriptions would be filled. The total, 600 pills, mostly powerful muscle relaxers and painkillers, easily enough for a deadly overdose, or big profits when marked up on the streets. It may surprise you to know, according to the DEA, that narcotic painkillers now cause more drug overdose deaths than cocaine and heroin combined.
You know, from that 17 when he first experimented with the beer and the Xanax, and as he got older and started progressing, he got to where at some point he knew that he had the addiction. He knew that he had it, and he hated it. He hated it.
I loved that child so much that I wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt.
His parents say Chris checked himself into rehab treatment twice, but the temptations were always there. Peer pressure and pals with pills, and yes, his own weaknesses. Christopher Scarborough was 25 years old.
Cause of death was combined drug toxicity from the exact 3 drugs that he had been prescribed by this clinic.
And they were? Vicodin,
Soma, and Xanax. Those 3 and only those 3.
Was that one of the bottles?
That's one of the bottles. That's a bottle that big. In my view, would be no different than if he had gone to the doctor and said, you know, I'm just a little depressed. I'm depressed and I don't really know what I want to do. Instead of giving pills, the doctor would say, well, I'll tell you what, just go ahead and take this pistol and these 6 bullets and go out to the shooting range and make yourself feel better, just do a little target practice. $360 pills.
Says take 1 tablet by mouth 4 times daily. And this is
hydrocodone. That's the Vicodin. And that bottle was full.
A lot of pills. Naturally, we did a lot of stories in 2009 about the economy. We tried to concentrate on the economy beyond the numbers. Our in-depth reporting in this last year has covered so many parts of the story and heard from so many players, from the policymakers to the new poor, especially those people who were living the good life one day only to see it evaporate the next. And that's certainly what happened in the land of the high rollers. Las Vegas is where you go to win. But as we reported in April, don't tell that to the people who call Sin City home.
Las Vegas has long sold fantasy, a fantasy now clashing with reality. And that leads us to the story of Penelope. That's not her real name. She's called an entertainer, an exotic dancer. And in her story, you can see all the hopes, fears, and uncertainty of today's Las Vegas.
Club Paradise Beauty for you, Mama and Penelope. Come right back for a couple more. Stick around, enjoy the show, have a round of cocktails.
You know, the thing about dancing is you might have a good week, you might have a bad week. There's many, many nights I leave negative after paying a house fee, and then I don't make that money back.
Entertainers like Penelope pay up front for the opportunity to dance. It's called a house fee and can be as much as $100 a night.
Apparently I owe y'all $284.
The dancers are personally paid in cash and keep their earnings, but they're expected to tip the staff, like the disc jockey and bartender, at the end of their shift, sometimes leaving with little to take home. Penelope, who's been dancing on and off for 20 years, moved here from Texas a year ago with the hope of getting out of dancing and into a casino job. That didn't pan out, and she found herself back on the stage, trying to make money in a time when there's little to go around.
The way that we're compensating for making less money is we're working more hours, we're working more shifts. You know, in Texas, I used to work from 7 to 2. Here, most of the clubs are open to the wee hours of the morning. Some of the clubs are open 24 hours a day. I will work until I'm just absolutely exhausted and can't work anymore, or I've made the money I need to make. You know, sometimes I work 15-hour shifts, you know, to make the money that I'm used to making or that I need to make.
How old is she?
She's 4.5. She'll be 5 in August.
So she's what, in preschool? Not yet?
Yeah, she's in pre-K, yeah. So she'll be kindergarten next year.
Penelope's #1 priority is her daughter, who suffers from autism. When they lived in Texas, her daughter's therapy cost over $4,000 a month. Penelope chose to pay it instead of her mortgage, and they lost their home before moving here to Las Vegas. In Nevada, a lot of the therapy is covered by the state.
I have very little out-of-pocket expenses for her as far as her therapy goes. It's just, you know, some of the things that are hard, or she's like on a special diet, and, you know, a loaf of bread that's this big is like $6 for her, gluten-free bread, and she eats a lot. She's this big, but she eats like a teenager.
Taking care of her daughter is a full-time job.
I still have not been contacted regarding the orientation for the autism program. She missed last week's therapy because she was sick, and I had to cancel my the last visit.
The serious Penelope at home is unrecognizable from the one that has to sell a carefree attitude at the dancing club.
I was getting the parent training over at Connection Center.
Ultimately, she must reconcile the two in a life where there's now very little margin for error.
Just making it in Las Vegas. And now the bailout and the fallout. We devoted considerable airtime to those who are watching where billions of dollars, many times your tax dollars, are going. First, the outspoken overseer of bailout money. She was appointed by Congress, and ever since, Elizabeth Warren has been on a tear. This from an interview we broadcast in April.
For 50 years, we have no bank failures, no major crises. It works. Now, there's innovation, there's change. It's time to change regulations. It gets to be the early 1980s. And what do? Instead of saying new products, we need to change regulations to adapt. We take a different path. We say,
We allow banks to go in the insurance business and vice
let's
versa.
deregulate. That's exactly right. We begin to break down the old regulations. We say, who needs regulations? They're so pokey, so old. So we go with this idea of let's get rid of regulation, and what happens? Late 1980s, savings and loan crisis, should have been a warning. Late 1990s, remember long-term capital management, the hedge fund, should have been a warning, but we let it go. Early 2000s, Enron, bad books, not telling the truth, should have been a warning, but we let it go. And where do we end up? In the biggest crisis since the Great Depression. Markets are wonderful. They produce great wealth for us, but they are by their very nature something we call pro-cyclical. When they're going up, they chase themselves up. Hey, wow, it's doing great. Up they go, and when they go down, they chase themselves down, and they go lower than actual supply and demand would suggest. Now look, we can live in a world of ups and downs for the rest of our lives. We can say, who needs regulation? Let's just ride that roller coaster wherever it goes. But you know, we have to remember, when it goes down, it doesn't just take down the people who gambled. It doesn't just take down the people who invested on Wall Street. It takes down everybody who's got a pension. It takes down folks who have jobs in construction industries and other industries that get hit by this. It takes down, in this case, it takes down homeowners, people who thought they were doing the right thing to protect themselves for the future. It takes down the prudent along with the gamblers and the wild ones.
Which is where we are today.
Which is exactly where we are today. So we could say, hey, no more regulation, that's fine, but look what it's brought us. We are not willing to let these big financial institutions fail. We've got this too big to fail notion, so we are going to shovel billions of dollars in their direction and still take the position we shouldn't regulate them. This is a world that may be a lot of fun for the high flyers who get theirs and keep theirs, but it's not a world that works very well for ordinary families.
Now, we also began talking to a freshman congressman from Florida long before he became a bold-faced name. Alan Grayson rode into Washington on President Obama's coattails, but he's quickly made a name for himself by asking tough questions nobody wanted to answer. This story we called Taking on the Fed, first broadcast in September.
We have an organization now that can willy-nilly hand out $1 trillion and is accountable to no one.
Meet freshman Congressman Alan Grayson, the first Democrat in 34 years to represent Orlando's 8th District.
Think about that. One person, the chairman of the Federal Reserve Bank, having the power to disburse $1 trillion without checking with the president, without talking to Congress, without being subject to the Freedom of Information Act, without having any auditing. This is outrageous.
Grayson was raised in a tough neighborhood in the Bronx. He worked his way through Harvard Law School, founded a telecommunications company that grew into a multi-billion-dollar business, and made a name for himself prosecuting Iraq war profiteers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Now, as a junior member of the House Financial Services Committee, the congressman with the colorful clothes is tackling what he calls the biggest, most secret bailout of them all, the Federal Reserve's emergency lending program.
Mr. Cohen, you just said that $1.2 trillion has been lent or spent, as the case may be. That's $4,000 for every man, woman, and child in this country. Don't Americans have the right to know how you spent that money?
Grayson wanted to find out where the money went, and so last May he grilled the Federal Reserve's Inspector General, Elizabeth Coleman.
Have you reached any conclusions about the Fed expanding its balance sheet by over $1 trillion since last September?
We have not yet reached any conclusions.
Do you know who received that money?
For the, we're in the process right now of doing our review, and
right, but you're the Inspector General. My question to you specifically is, do you know who received that $1 trillion plus that the Fed extended and put on its balance sheet since last September? Do you know the identity of the recipients?
I do not know. We have not looked at that specific area at this particular point on those reviews.
The hearing room had emptied, and the exchange seemed destined for C-SPAN obscurity until one of Grayson's staffers posted it on YouTube, where it hit a nerve.
Mr. Chairman, my time is up, but I have to tell you honestly, I am shocked to find out that nobody at the Federal Reserve, including the Inspector General, is keeping track of this.
2.5 million clicks and counting.
The Inspector General for the Federal Reserve, how did she get that job?
She got that job because the Federal Reserve appointed her. You know, in general, inspectors general are supposed to be watchdogs, are supposed to be independent of their agencies. That's why we have a general accounting office, a government accountability office. It's independent. But in her case, she was appointed by the Federal Reserve.
Let me get this straight. She's supposed to be a watchdog, but the people she's supposed to be watching, they get to choose her.
That's right. And that doesn't make a lot of sense, does it?
What we have for you next is part of a story we brought to you in November. We called it Treasure Island. It's the story of Madagascar, the island nation off the coast of Africa that was once a magical place. It's now becoming an environmental disaster.
Madagascar lies just 250 miles off the southeastern African coast, but because it is separated from the continent by deep seas and strong trade winds, the island's creatures evolved in total isolation. At least 70% of Madagascar's plants and animals can be found nowhere else on Earth. Many of these one-of-a-kind species are threatened, including the island's most famous inhabitants, the lemurs. Lemurs are primates, scientifically just like humans. They're a diverse bunch, some as small as a mouse, others as big as a dog. They're also very rare, but that wasn't always the case. Lemurs evolved about 60 million years ago. But when people arrived on their island just 2,000 years ago, things began to get ugly. Eric Patel is a doctoral candidate at Cornell University. He got his start in Wright's National Park, but when he saw pictures of very unique lemurs that lived in another part of the country, he was smitten.
I learned that there were still a couple lemur species that had never been studied. And I was just kind of stunned by how gorgeous they were. I mean, they're, white puffballs. They're beautiful animals. And I was also stunned by how rare they were. It was just hard to believe how few remained.
To see the rare silky Sifaka lemurs, ambitious visitors climb on a treacherous trail for hours through a dense, wet jungle. This summer, we sent a cameraman and a reporter to join Patel when he went to check on a particular group of silkies that live near a research camp at the center of the park. On the way in, they hear some troubling news.
We'd actually heard a rumor that one of the infants may have been killed during the Rosewood fiasco. We're not sure if that's actually true now. We're still looking for the infants. We haven't found them yet.
Again, the trackers locate the group, and Patel finally sees one of the two young lemurs.
Okay. Yeah, this is one of our one-year-olds. It's not an individual we know very well.
He never found the other one.
It's hard for a silky Sifaka infant to survive, and we've lost a lot over the years. We're really worried about them. They're so rare. I mean, they don't survive in zoos. It's not likely we'll be able to breed them in zoos in the near future. It's really the silky Sifakas here in Marojeji in the high, high mountains that might be the last hope in 100 years.
Patel may never know what happened to the missing baby silky Sifaka lemur. It's impossible to prove that it's a victim of the logging. But losing a baby is a tough blow for Patel and the effort to save this endangered species.
Just ahead, more of Dan Rather reports, some of the best of 2009. So stay with us. And now, trucking. Judging by your responses, the investigative series we aired on the men and women who pilot 18-wheelers and their driver training, or lack of it, was one of the year's most popular. We began with the story of a very outspoken driver named Desiree.
We profiled Desiree Wood, a 45-year-old trucker who said she had been poorly trained to drive big rigs and that she had observed others being poorly trained. She says she spent thousands of dollars at a commercial driver's license school in Florida called the CDL school.
So how did you wind up choosing to go to trucking school? Seems an odd choice.
I mostly did not want to work in an office. I wanted to go somewhere where I was going to do my job and be left alone.
But here at the Miami campus of the CDL school, Wood says she didn't expect to be left alone quite so much. She says she paid more than $5,500, and she wanted to learn how to drive a truck. Instead, she says she spent most of the time crushing cones on the driving course.
Well, did you have a lot of driving practice? Did they give you a lot of driving school experience?
No. My school, we got our written part out of the way the first week. Then we go to the driving course. And basically, they would drop us off there, and they'd be like, there's the trucks. We'll pick you up at 7.
And she says actual road training was limited to 2 very short trips in 3 weeks.
I only got 2 times. You're supposed to go 3, but the last day I was like begging them, like, I haven't gone out very much. Can I go?
Well, you know that a lot of people will hear this and say, you mean to tell me she went to what is supposed to be trucking school, and she actually only drove the truck more or less around the block?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, what do we think of that?
It's unsafe.
Well, do you think or not that new drivers who've gotten their CDL, a commercial driver's license, when they start driving, are they really ready to drive a big rig, what, 80,000 pounds on the highway?
No, they're not. I mean, they're putting these people out on the highway that some of them are inappropriate to ever sit in this seat, and they're pushing them through these schools
It's
until
a business.
Yes, it's a business. It's an industry in itself, these students.
We also met Tom Hansen, who was speaking out for the first time about driver training, or lack of it, at his former company, CRST Van Expediter.
When I see a truck from a former company I worked for, I give them a lot of space because I'm not so sure of that person's skills.
Until very recently, Hansen worked as a manager here at CRST's terminal in Oklahoma City. Every Monday morning for 5 years, Hansen says, he got 30 to 40 new recruits who he'd put through a battery of checks and tests, trying to ensure that they qualified for CRST's finishing school for new drivers.
When this brand new student got there, did they pass the qualifications that we gave them? Could they write their name more than once? Could they read a map? Could they pass a road test without hitting 4 curbs or being able to shift the truck? I know from personal experience, doing thousands of road tests, at least in the last 7 years, literally thousands, that's not an exaggeration. There's a lot of them who probably shouldn't be doing this business. They probably should stick to maybe, drywalling or roofing or whatever they were doing in the past.
Safety on the highway. And finally tonight, safety on the field. This is the story of a courageous youngster we met last winter. Zachary Lysted was just a typical boy growing up outside Seattle. He loved sports, especially football. But what happened to Zachary on the field one afternoon became a wake-up call to athletes everywhere.
I was never so scared in my life. I mean, there's no pain that I could ever feel worse than that pain.
Victor Lysted's life changed in an instant on this football field one sunny fall afternoon in 2006.
You know, it's a moment that I wouldn't wish on any parent. I mean, your child just one day before that was perfect. I mean, there wasn't anything wrong with your child. And then one day later, you don't know if your child's going to live, and they're fighting for their life for day after day after day.
His son, star athlete Zach Lysted, used to have a lot of big days. On the baseball field, he scored 2 runs to send his team into extra innings. And on the football field, he played both offense and defense for his Seattle area team.
I never missed any of Zachary's games. Always excited to watch my son play football. He excelled at it, and so I I wanted to see him perform.
October 12, 2006 started out like any other afternoon football game. Zach was in the 8th grade, number 31 in the center of your screen. This play in the second quarter was when Zach's life went horribly wrong. Here's another angle. You can see him catch up with his opponent and make a tackle. His head snaps backwards and hits the field. Zach puts his hands up to his head, rocking back and forth. Doctors later said this is when he sustained a concussion and should not have returned to play. But in the second half, he was back in the game. Zach played defense. He's in the pile there making the tackle. And he played offense. Here he carries the ball. And here he makes a block. With his brain still recovering from the first concussion, doctors now believe these additional hits caused even more dangerous pressure inside his skull. His dad could tell something was off.
At the very end of the game, I noticed my son was shaking his head and not doing what a normal child should do, and I didn't understand what was going on, and I started getting a little concerned, and I walked out and asked Zach what was wrong with him, and he said, "Dad, my head hurts really bad. My head hurts really bad." He started losing consciousness, went down to the ground, and suffered stroke after stroke.
With brain cells quickly dying, Zach was airlifted from the football field to Seattle's Harborview Medical Center. He spent a week in the ICU, 3 months in a coma, and had surgeries on both sides of his brain. His mother, Mercedes, remembers.
It was always nerve-wracking when the doctors would come in and check everything and stuff, and you could see the only thing that was protecting the brain was the skin. And every time they touched him, you were afraid, oh my gosh, I hope they're not doing something to hurt him. They reassured us that they weren't, but you still aren't, sure of that.
He couldn't say anything. He didn't say his first word till about 9 months. He said, "Oh." 9 months after his injury. He couldn't move any part of his body for about 13 months, and he started moving his left side a little.
And the Lysteds have started to see these tiny accomplishments as major victories. This is Zach Lysted today. The touchdowns and tackles on the football field are gone, but Zach still enjoys playing sports through video games. He's even learned to play Wii using his left arm. And he's able to be competitive with his best friend, Naya. We spent a typical day with him and saw just how grueling his schedule is.
Pull, Zach.
Go.
Pull, pull.
First stop in the morning,
Nice work.
physical therapy to work on relearning how to walk.
Get tall, bring that weight forward. Good job, Zach.
Then speech therapy for improved language and reasoning skills.
Making inferences, drawing conclusions.
Second good catch.
Occupational therapy
There you go.
for coordination.
Okay, now we're coming out.
And after a quick meal in the van, he's off to work with a personal trainer at a local gym to try to rebuild his muscle.
So keep it slow. Control it on the way.
The hardest part of seeing their son go through this is knowing it was all preventable. The Lysteds have filed a claim against the school district, partly because Zach was sent back into the game after his first head injury. A lawyer for the school district says the coaches did indeed evaluate Zach for a concussion after that first hit to the head and felt comfortable returning him to play, a move they believe would not have changed the outcome of Zach's medical condition.
My son had a concussion, was returned to play without being evaluated correctly, and had multiple hits after that led to his injury the way he is right now. If he would have been taken out of the game and not returned to play, all the medical professionals said my son would not be the way he is right now. They all say that.
Don't go on my knee. I learned not to go on my knee from my dad.
If somebody wants to trade me spots for a minute, they would totally understand how important it is to get the message out to kids, to parents, to coaches, what the long-lasting effect of a concussion and returning to play is.
After our original story aired, Zach's saga picked up more national attention on cable and network news programs and also in newspapers. Then, too, the NFL has done an about-face and is now suddenly taking brain trauma to professional football players much more seriously. We will continue our investigation into young athletes and head injuries coming early next year. And that's our program for tonight. There was so much more we couldn't squeeze into this hour that we're mighty proud of. If you'd like to see more of Dan Rather Reports, we're always available on iTunes. Thanks again for your support in 2009. We wish you a safe, joyous, and prosperous new year. From New York, for HDNet, Dan Rather reporting. Good night.
If you'd like to add your name to an email list for information on upcoming programs, or if you would just like to send a question or comment, please email us at viewer@hd.net. The people here are heirs to a rich cultural history, but this regional southern capital is now one of the most violent parts of the country. Western journalists seldom come here. It's a Taliban stronghold, and it will be the center of America's troop increases. Many an empire has fought for its control. In 1994, the Taliban captured the city and made it their headquarters. You can see through the haze the outline of a mosque where Mullah Omar, the Taliban leader, once preached. If this city of over 300,000 looks like it's frozen in history, there's a good reason. Legend says it was founded by Alexander the Great, and it sits astride the famed trade routes of antiquity. Today, the city is on edge. The people here, like those throughout Afghanistan, are uncertain of the future. A fledgling local police and army try to keep the peace, but all await the arrival of the Americans and the battle to come. The expectation is that there will be many civilian casualties, and those who are wounded are likely to end up here at Kandahar's Mirwais Regional Hospital. And what a region it is. This is the only hospital for an area twice the size of Indiana, and it serves more than 2 million people. The hospital was built in the 1970s and can only offer the most basic care. Suicide bomber's intended target, perhaps because of his cooperation with coalition forces. Captains Zaruba and Hilt tour the bomb site with the sub-governor and try to assuage his fears by telling him the U.S.-trained Afghan security guard performed extremely well.
And the ASG did a great job. They did exactly what they were supposed to do. And they stopped the suicide bomber from going into the district center.
Masa?
There might be a half of a print on it.
Yeah, there's a print.
All right, nice. Whoop, whoop. I found a finger. Yep.
A finger found among the scattered remains of the suicide bomber is run through the biometric system.
Right now I'm just wiping off the charcoal from the blast to try to get the grooves for the fingerprint so we can identify this guy. There we go. Oh.
A fingerprint is obtained, but it doesn't match anyone in the system, and the search for identifiable body parts and other evidence continues. Back inside, Captain Hilt addresses the men about another concern.
Some of the things that we know is that the kids that typically hang around were walking with the guy just prior to him detonating. We have permission now to take AMP and go search their village. Let me throw this out there. I don't think it was the kids.
Guilty by association.
Yeah, but that's what it is. At this point, we have to take a guilty by association. And who knows, it could have been one of their family members that they didn't even know. That's why we're going over to their village.
At the kids' village, a local man tells Captain Hilt that he hasn't seen anything suspicious, but Hilt knows that there are often other factors at play, such as intimidation from the Taliban.
The following story contains graphic images that could be disturbing to some. Viewer discretion is advised.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us. 2009 has been an incredible year, especially when you're lucky enough to cover news around the world. We've had the opportunity and privilege of bringing you something unique, and that's the stories and perspectives you're mostly not hearing anywhere else. We strive very hard to look beyond the headlines, to dig really deeply into topics that oftentimes are brushed over in the manic world of cable and other news. We also give stories the time that they deserve. So as we wrap up 2009, we thought it might be interesting to take a look back at our year with snapshots of some of the stories we've covered. We begin in Afghanistan, where there was an election, a change in command, a change in strategy, and a surge in U.S. and NATO troops. But there's so much more to the story. Few broadcast outlets anywhere in the world have devoted the time and resources we have to covering the conflict and the consequences. In May, we aired a story on limiting civilian casualties, whom to shoot and whom not to shoot. We traveled to the dangerous city of Kandahar in southern Afghanistan.
There are several hundred beds, but patients are crowded, many to a room, with no curtains or privacy. The Red Cross helps support the hospital, and one worker estimated that 83% of patients admitted in the wards were affected by the conflict in some way. This man says he was farming the fields in neighboring Helmand province when he was caught in a firefight between the Taliban and coalition forces. His brother brought him to the hospital. Whoever fired the shots, he said, his brother is badly wounded. You expect violence from the Taliban. They're rebels, he argued, but the foreign forces promise stability, and the country has only gotten more dangerous.
Now to the east, and another constant threat to soldiers and civilians, suicide bombers who terrorize the fragile framework of Afghanistan's young democracy. In a story from last January, we showed you how a quiet day on the front lines can change in a horrifying instant.
Some of the other areas, a couple of kilometers away, they get a lot of action. They get mortared and things like that. I don't know why our area seems so quiet sometimes.
You know there's enemy activity out here, but it's like we're just sitting here docile. We're waiting for them instead of us going out to get them. And I'd rather be out there.
And then, without warning,
Hey, two people follow Doc.
Hold up, you're all not rushing out there.
Hey!
Grenade. Grenade. On the ground by the foot. I have no idea.
You're okay, okay? You're okay. You're okay.
Got a live grenade just to the left of the leg. There's another leg over here, but I don't want to walk over there in case something happens. There's a brain and all kinds of bullshit everywhere.
Do we know what happened?
I don't know. I haven't found out yet, but I guess the guy walked up here. They stopped him, talked to him, and he blew up.
Surveillance video taken at the gate revealed that a suicide bomber had detonated himself when the Afghan security guard refused to let him on the base. A helicopter arrived to transport the two men injured in the attack to an army hospital. One of the men is an Afghan national policeman, and the other, one of the ASG members trained by Zaruba and his team.
I told him, look at me and breathe with me. Breathe with me.
We got really lucky. I think the ASG guy's going to make it. The A&P guy's definitely pretty good, but we just got to stay vigilant. Keep an eye on the ASG. They're going to be a little shaky right now. Everyone tracking? They're going to be a little bit shaky. Sub-governor's a little shooken up right now.
Of course he is.
Yeah.
Oh.
There is speculation that the sub-governor of the Tarazai district was the suicide